Thank you for coming. I'd like to do an unusual thing today, namely talk about songs as a measure of political leaders' popularity or notoriety. It's partly because in totalitarian conditions, sociological surveys are not particularly reliable. So I'd like to see today if we could extract some correctives for Lukashenko's extremely high election results year on year, through something else that could sort of give us perhaps a different angle on the data. Belarusian musicians traditionally have played an active role in anti-Lukashenko protests. In the 1998 video game called Minsk Band, a rocker called Levon Volsky from the NRM has been used as a kind of good man, a hero against the villain represented by Lukashenko. I'd also like to take a quick look at how Lukashenko features by comparison with other prominent political leaders with a controversial reputation, such as Lenin, Stalin, and Putin, in terms of songs about them. My collection of songs about Lukashenko numbers 97 at this point. I haven't really looked thoroughly and methodically into collecting all the available songs about Lenin, Stalin, and Putin, but I know of at least 40 songs about Lenin in different languages, including Armenian, Vietnamese. Most of them are complementary. There are about 60 songs about Stalin that I'm aware of, including Swedish and Hebrew. They're also mostly complementary, surprise, surprise. There are 65 known songs about Putin. Someone else collected them conveniently for us. About half of them are critical and satirical. When we look at Lukashenko's numbers, I'm getting slightly ahead of my slides here, but just to give the game away, what the hell? Over 80% of them are critical. Only 6 are complementary. And there are some ambivalent ones as well, which is a special category that I'm going to discuss separately. But to give you a bit of a background on Belarusian popular music under Lukashenko, I suppose some of you could benefit from that. There was a BBC World Service program released in 2007 where certain gentleman called Lemes Lovas, is a pseudonym of Johnson Walton, said that the situation with musicians in Belarus is a critical indicator of the general situation with the freedom of expression in the country. Mark Sevashin, a keyboard player for the punk band Neurodubel, speaking to the same BBC World Service program, said there's a strange dichotomy in the media between actively encouraging homegrown music and only music that is officially approved by the government. In 2004, a rock concert at Minsk Bangalore Square commemorating Lukashenko's 10 years in power was stopped, and about a dozen bands that had been participating in this concert were subsequently blacklisted, that is banned from all kinds of public performances in Belarus and deprived of income as a result, because these days bands like that, they make money on concerts, not on record releases. Overall, if you don't know much about Belarusian popular music, and when I say popular, I don't mean pop psi in the Russian sense, Strada or something like that. I mean non-classical music. It's really very rich and varied, and I would encourage you to listen to it, since you're all scholars here interested in Belarus, and apparently music is an international thing to admire and enjoy. All musical genres and styles are represented in large and often rewarding quantities, and there are many languages used, not only Belarusian or Russian, but also Polish, English, French, and so on and so forth. It's really quite global. And according to Lemes Lovas and his co-author Maya Medic in the Free Muse report number 7 of November 2006, which is called Hidden Truths, Music, Politics, and Censorship in Lukashenko's Belarus, popular Belarusian musicians are divided into the official and the unofficial groups. I'll mostly concentrate on the latter because my material dictates me so. So the statistics. As I've said, I've got 97 songs in total, collected thanks to expert advice, by snowballing, partly through YouTube algorithms, because my main material comes from the YouTube, also through systematic listening to Belarusian popular music, and items that I have included, they all contain a significant direct reference to, or maybe a hint at, Lukashenka or his family members, such as his youngest son Kola, in the lyrics. The collection starts in 1995 and continues up until 2024. I'm really hoping to be able to draw a line here somewhere, because life is short. But you understand, 97 is something significant to work with. I also like this number because it's almost 100. Therefore, the pie charts and the graphs that you will see later on, it's almost like a 100%. And yeah, it's sort of a convenient subdivision of various things in those graphs that I will explain shortly. As a rule, all songs come mostly in two languages, Belarusian, including Trasanka. I consider it a subset of Belarusian literary language. Most of them are negative by default. If it's in Belarusian or in Trasanka, that's anti-Lukashenko, okay? So you can see that the international range, you will see the corresponding slide, is much narrower than in Lenin's and Stalin's cases. Songs about Putin are mostly in Russian. There are two groups of songwriters, song performers, those from Belarus or inside Belarus, people who had to leave Belarus. I still count as belonging to this category. There are 81 songs like that. And those outside Belarus, non-Belarusians, only 16, primarily representing Russia and Ukraine, but also there is a curious case of the US-bound Coco Rosie. Within each group, as I've already said, but it's worth repeating, songs can be either critical, complimentary, or ambivalent. They tend to proliferate in the run-up to and in the aftermath of the especially important elections. Like, for example, we've got 9 songs alone released in 2010, well over 20 released in 2020. But normally there are some gaps in some years and an average of 2 or 3 songs in non-election years, as you will see in a graph that will follow. As I've already said, there are only 6 songs that are complementary, which is, strictly speaking, 6.5% of the total. 2 of these songs have been actually written by Russian composers. Alex Sorokin in 2006, Slushai Batka, for those of you who know what it is, and Natalia Montik, Nash President, from 2018. But all those 6 songs have been performed by Belarusian musicians, including via Sabri. There's an interesting case of Krynichanka. It's a folk group, female group that released their song on video on YouTube in 2015. It's complementary to Lukashenko, reminiscent of songs addressed to Lenin and Stalin that were sung by folk performers, the so-called fake lore, right? In those years. It's bizarre that even those who feel loyalty to Lukashenko, they're not in a hurry to compose songs extolling his virtues. And only 10 songs can be categorized as ambivalent, just the 10%. So here's graph number 1, songs number per year. You can see the peak around 2020. Okay. Songs by content, complementary takes just the blue section of the pie chart, the ambivalent, the green one, and the rest is devoted to the critical ones. Songs by language, we've got Belarusian, Trasanka, English, Russian, and Ukrainian. For the outsider group, the sort of non-Belarusians that sometimes sing in English or in Ukrainian. Again, here the bulk is represented by Russian, 55 songs, or almost 55%, 27 is in Trasanka, and 12 songs in Belarusian, which sort of represents the sorry, 27 songs in Belarusian and 12 in Trasanka, which represents the, I suppose, the general pattern of usage. Graph number 4 shows non-Belarusian songs by country. Here we've got Russia and Ukraine and Germany and USA, and also one unknown song that is on YouTube, and it's thematically relevant. It's clear that it's not a Belarusian person singing it, but it's hard to identify where this song comes from, and the authors are anonymized, and they perform as well. But I've included it for the fullness of the picture. If we had more time, I would have played 6 sample soundtracks for you here. One of them is the Krynichanka 2015, another Novaya Neba from 1995. This is one of the most exciting Belarusian musical phenomena at the time. Various musicians around the guitar point from Minsk, Kasia Kamotskaya. The first band is a kind of female band, if you like. This one is a female voice as well, but a single one. The point is that she disagrees with the majority's political preference in 1995, when Lukashenko really had a genuine mass support. And in this song, she voices an early realization of the desirability of Lukashenko's demise. The title line says, "President, iди домой." Rocket Joker 2010 is a Minsk duo of Mikhail Nosorogov and Max Sirey. Sanya останется с нами, все будет okay, in the Alko Boogie style. There was a big hit at the time. Sanya, of course, is the eponymous Alexander Lukashenko, who isn't referred to as a president, but the bottom line is that don't go anywhere, we're happy with you, but it's served in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. It's a lovely clip as well, in a pseudo-folk style, and it's one of those ambivalent songs that I've collected. The next song would have been by Ilyich. This is a pseudonym of a musician who's now better known as Little Big. Little Big, anyone? Yes, yeah. Some people know who I mean. Millions of followers on YouTube. But that's an early effort from 2011. He's a Russian musician from the Far East, from the Russian Far East. This song is called Dайте газу, which portrays a shifty president of a poor country indebted to all its neighbors. Then Sasha Ilukevich and his band, the Highly Skilled Migrants, they have a post-punk song called Kolya, about Lukashenko's youngest son. That was released in 2012. Has anyone heard of Ilukevich and the Highly Skilled Migrants? Very good. They are local. Ilukevich has lived in the UK for over 20 years now, and he can be invited to occasions like this and perform for us with an acoustic guitar, if not within a full set. The final example would have been Простыми словами, a cabaret-like duo of Kirill Danko, was a Belarus-born TV director at the point of release living in Minsk. And that's a 2021 answer song to Rocket Joker 2010, shedding the ambiguity and expressing wishes for Lukashenko to drop dead.
Can we listen to at least one?
Sorry?
Can we listen to at least one?
If there's time,
just for
maybe during the reception, I don't know. 90% of them, you'll enjoy some, I can guarantee you that much. Let's just look for the time being at some photos and quick quotes. In English translation, Kasia Kamotskaya is on this slide. This is what she says. They rush for a beer every day, and it seems to them that everything's okay. They wonder what's for sale, where and how much for, and hope it'll be cheaper. And you and I have chosen freedom, but you can't drink it like beer, and we've left behind 3 words, President, go home. That's 1995. Ilyich, that's Lukashenko speaking to Putin and other important people. You'll supply gas to entire Belarus, and I'll give you a sack of potato. it's a cheap joke, but with a funny tune, it really works well. And the video clip is also very elaborate and impressive. So that's 2011. Sasha Lukevich, for your attention. Kola, you're not in school again, but is this your fault? Kola, we go to reap your fruits, then we parade for you. Kola, against our will, you are born as the ruler to repossess someone else's awards, and so on and so forth. Kind of post-punk style, very powerful. Now, I'm going to move on straight to the interpretation of data and conclusions. 4 slides for your attention, all right? First of all, proportionately speaking, of the 4 country leaders in question, that's Stalin, Putin, Lenin, and Lukashenko. Lukashenko, as he comes across through the songs in that collection, is the most unpopular figure, if the dominant joint opinion of Belarusian and Russian pop musicians is anything to go by. Idealistic motivation for songs of praise, obvious in the cases of Lenin, Stalin, and even Putin. There is a category, fairly small, of the early 2000s, where there were serious hopes pinned upon Mr. Putin, and genuine songs sort of sprang out from that. All of that seems almost completely absent from songs about Lukashenko. Also, we can observe that Tsarist musicians performing TV and radio-friendly tunes tend to be more supportive of Lukashenko than the freelance musicians of countercultural persuasions. For Russian musicians, interestingly, Lukashenko is an especially easy target. They laugh at him for being a semi-literate, potato-loving, accordion and ice hockey playing, gas oil cadging, lifelong incumbent, because they can't laugh at Putin, who shares some of Lukashenko's characteristics too. For them, Lukashenko becomes a kind of proxy figure for Russian domestic issues. Most Russian satirical songs about Lukashenko appeared during Medvedev's presidency anyway, when there was a kind of thaw. It appears that if it was up to the majority of Belarusian pop musicians alone, Lukashenko would have never been president in the first place. And the antipathy is mutual. It seems that the model for Lukashenko's relationship with musicians seems to partially derive from Yanka Kupala's poem Kurgan from 1910. Kurgan, anyone? All right. Anyway, for those who haven't read it yet, a harp player in it is buried alive under a mound for telling the truth about a prince to his face at a public feast in a song form. Okay? Lukashenko doesn't kill his musicians, but he imprisons them for unauthorized performances, public disorder and lèse-majesté, and blacklists them so that they can give authorized concerts and are therefore doomed to starvation. Recently, it appears that Lukashenko's attitude to musicians has hardened. They have been given jail sentences from 7.5 to 9 years for the tour band members, for example. That was passed on the 1st of October 2023 for inciting hatred, creating an extremist group, discrediting Belarus and insulting the president. I'm quoting here from a court ruling. For comparison, Alexander Feduta, who had been mentioned here, I think, by Professor Marples, in September 2022 was sentenced to 10 years for planning in 2021 an actual anti-Lukashenko coup. Yep. Slide number 3, with conclusions. Belarusian songwriters' approach to Lukashenko as a subject seems to be largely determined by evolutionary concerns, given that music in general originates from the depths of mankind's history as a powerful survival mechanism. Basically, for authors living under a kind of modern-day autocracy or a liberal democracy or whatever you want to call Lukashenko's regime right now, there's a short-term survival strategy and a long-term survival strategy. The short-term survival strategy would be praising the country's ruler. A long-term survival strategy would be undermining the ruler, even at the risk to authors' individual well-being. So these authors consciously sacrifice themselves for the sake of future generations. So the short-term strategy in my collection of songs about Lukashenko results in complementary pro-Lukashenko songs. The second long-term strategy is reflected in the critical anti-Lukashenko ones. The third ambivalent strategy is undermining the ruler by ostensibly praising him or her, him in our case. It's also evident in the collection, but doesn't appear to be widespread, possibly because it's a reasonably safe option for the songwriter, but quite confusing for the audience, because the audience doesn't really know where it stands. And one final thing to say, songs are, of course, part of a magic ritual that can promote wishful thinking. We all know about Kolyadki, yeah? Give us more food, give us more wealth, dear God. There's also an interesting genre, little known genre, but it does exist. And I think it plays a role in this collection of songs about Lukashenka. It's called Peasant Death to Landlord tunes, yeah? When peasant is unhappy with the landlord and sings a song, when will you die, and you know, and you will eventually, and that'll be my liberation, that sort of thing. So I think for some of those songs, we can definitely say they've been affected consciously or subconsciously by this tradition of peasant death to landlord tunes. One example, that would have been a bonus soundtrack if we had time, and I'm going to finish with this, is called "В Гаагу поезд по весне отправится" by a cabaret-like duo of Andrei Pavuk and Margarita Lauchuk. I don't know if you've heard of this cabaret duo called Krasnaya Zelень. She's effectively a very powerful, skilled, well-trained opera singer, and he's a punk musician. But they unite the effort to diss Lukashenko in many memorable installments on YouTube as well. So it's like Montserrat Caballé and Freddie Mercury songs. Thank you.
Please let me know if you can see them.
We can. It's perfect.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot for this great company at the panel. And today I will be presenting the article that I have submitted and that is soon to be published at Communist and Post-Communist Studies. And this article is addressing the issue I'm generally interested in regarding how technology is being used by both democratic forces, but also by the regimes in the context of autocracies. And in this case, we are looking at the example of Belarusian regime, and namely at how technology has been integrated into the repressive machine by the Belarusian regime. So we all know that protests in Belarus in August 2020 mostly are associated with this picture, with the large amounts of people around on the streets who are like a lot of people who were there, approximately from, according to different estimations, from 300,000 to 600,000. And we also have seen the picture of this protest that have been manifested a lot on the social media. And particularly for this reason, a lot of scholars have started to investigate and to look into how social media and how broader technology has been integrated into the oppositional movement, into the strategies of resistance, both on the bottom level, but also on the coordinational level. At the same time, there is little research that addresses the topic of how Belarusian regime has been integrating and co-opting technological tools and advancements for their responses towards the active protests in Belarus in 2020. So this is what I'm looking at in this article, and I will shortly present the results of it. I'm guided by the two main research questions. First is how the Belarusian regime engaged with the digital repression following the mass protests in 2020, and also how does the Belarusian regime attempt to legitimize itself on digital platforms. And I'm guided here by the two main typologies or approaches. One of them is proposed by Feldstein, and this approach reflects on digital repression, which forms of digital repression exist in authoritarian countries. And also I'm guided by von Soest and Graufogel, who are looking at legitimacy or legitimation attempts by the authoritarian regimes in the analog settings, first of all, but I'm trying to also apply it to the digital setting to derive some conclusions based on the Belarusian case. So I have conducted a case study in order to analyze what kind of repression practices that follow typology of Feldstein. And then I took a closer look at how particular type of this digital repression was implemented in Belarus, such as legal regulations. So I've looked at different media laws, informatization laws, and 10 other together articles of the Belarusian Criminal Code plus 6 laws. And I've looked at how they have incorporated the influence of internet, basically how to better regulate the internet in order to maintain the power. And then I also have examined the digital legitimation claims or attempts to legitimize itself through various networks of Telegram channels that were created by the Belarusian authorities. And these mostly are the channels that are sort of administrative channels of different institutions, or the channels that are used as the kind of press communication. For example, the Pool Первого, which is the press service of Lukashenka in a way. So in total, I've looked at 16 Telegram channels that where I looked at types of legitimation. So a little closer to also the concept of digital repression. It's simply, according to Feldstein, the use of information and communications technology to surveil, coerce, or to manipulate individuals or groups in order to deter specific activities or beliefs that challenge the state. And when he talks about the digital repression, we have this types of repression that he distinguishes, which is the surveillance, censorship, targeted prosecution of online users, internet shutdowns, and social manipulation and disinformation. So these are the concepts I used for my analysis for the case study of the usage of technology by the Belarusian regime. And also when it comes to legitimacy types, the authors that I rely on use these 6 types of legitimation, which is the foundational myth, ideology, personalism, procedures, performance, and international engagement. I believe to save a little bit of time, I won't go through the clarification of each of them. I would be happy to later share my article, and there you can find a little more explanation on that. But otherwise, the typology can be summarized shortly through this illustration. So moving on, I will stop here again for the sake of time on a couple of examples that I looked at, and we'll talk a little bit about internet shutdowns, first of all, and then about legal regulation of the digital space. So firstly, there is this interesting episode that has occurred in Belarus in summer 2020, but also apparently a little earlier, 2 years in advance before the protest. The Belarusian regime has purchased this deep packet inspection from the American company called Statesmen. That is basically the package that allows to block internet in the country with one go, so to say, quite quickly. It has been tested 2 times prior to the protests, precisely 1 month before the presidential election. And also it was used, precisely this technology was used to shut down internet across the country on this major protest days when the country was completely shut down from the internet, almost completely, with maybe some instances when people could reach Telegram or they could use the internet at home, which is stationary computer internet. So, and then it was tested also until within short periods before October 2020, before there was some kind of articulation made by, I believe, Belarusian activists, which led to Statesmen to stop collaboration with the Belarusian regime, or basically shut down the possibility for the Belarusian regime to use this package within the country, because the motivation, I believe, behind that was that it is some kind of political usage, although we don't know the official position of Statesmen. It has not been published. But what I'm trying to say here is that basically those internet shutdowns that occurred in the country were made possible by this specific technological tool provided by the Sandvin. Otherwise, the internet shutdowns would not be so effective in terms of coverage of the Belarus as a whole territory, and would not allow this to block this much of URL addresses. And just some numbers as well that I believe are very telling here is that experts whom I refer to in my article point to the fact that one day of such internet shutdown cost the Belarusian regime about $56 million. Others say that the actual costs come up to something around $70 million per day. So this is also an expensive tool that kind of maybe explains partly why the Belarusian regime decided to activate internet again, because this technology is quite expensive to activate. If we look at another type of digital repression that is also pointed by Feldstein is the regulation of internet by different laws and decrees. So in this article, I also look at how internet space is regulated. And we must also consider that the Belarusian regime is still not yet advanced in the digitalization of the laws and different legal documents. It is rather quite superficial and sometimes pretty much unclear what this specific paragraph or regulation means. At the same time, there are certain paragraphs that allow to come to conclusion that the goal of internet regulation has been in place. And we also can see that the amount of amendments that has been made since 2020 was much bigger than before. So the internet regulation proposals that were made to the specific laws and decrees might have been triggered by specifically the protest episode in August 2020. So I've conducted the content analysis following Margit Schreier's method of QCA, and for some reason it says also Russia, but I looked only in Belarus. So these were the laws, for example, this that you can see on the screen: mass media, countering extremism, information informatization, and 3 other laws and 10 criminal code decrees. Paragraphs. And if we move to a little bit shorter overview of what the analysis points to, I've divided this based on the Schreier's topology or Schreier's method to 7 categories that derive from the data. So I basically try to see what these laws do in relation to regulation of internet. And then we can see that most of the laws have, at some, to the most degree, they have included the idea of power of the state. So the power of the state, how the state sanctions people for certain actions related to internet, is the major part in the data. Then there is this description of which actors are involved in internet regulation. Laws also regulate and describe in what way, on which levels this regulation occurs. It is either organizational, it is either state level or an individual level. They also point out to some aspects of internet regulation, describing the such procedures as identification and demands for authentication that have been posed on the Belarusian media, for example, to collect data and demand authentication of their users who want to comment on web pages, etc. And then the laws that sometimes in other countries describe a lot what principles are in ground of these laws, for example, freedom of speech and protection of private life, there is quite little of such indications in the Belarusian laws. And the least present category is rights of the citizens. So the powers of the state to control internet has much more place in the Belarusian legal regulation as compared to the rights of the citizens. And again, this is a very qualitative overview, which of course could be detailed, more detailed if other methods were applied here. But to move on a little bit to some examples. So, for example, the Belarusian media law says that conducting the preliminary identification of users, collect and process, store and provide. So there are a lot of regulations that regard collection of such personal data as last name, first name, gender, day, month of birth, and then place of birth and mobile phone. So they basically specify this in relation to the media, the web pages, the online media that allow commenting. And then if we move forward, then we also see that there is a lot of attention to the bodies that regulate the internet in a way. So there is this Republican government body in the field of mass media that has a right to decide on restricting access to the internet resources as a whole. So in contrast to some other countries, the procedure of blocking and depriving certain web page of access to its audience is much easier, but also is very vaguely described in the Belarusian legal documents, regulations. So moving on to legitimacy claims by the Belarusian regime on Telegram. I've looked at the sample of 5,000 publications, and these are the 16 pro-regime Telegram channels that I analyzed in the period of July 2023. This period has nothing specific in it. It was chosen as the period where none of the big political events happened. There were no elections. So the idea here is to test how and what is being said on this, published on these Telegram channels when the political context is kind of calm in a way in comparison to the previous years. Although it can be debated, of course, maybe the other month would show something else, but at least the amount of sample allows to make a conclusion that it's pretty much, this is a pretty big variety of types of content that is made there. But as for the purpose of this article, I only want to look at legitimacy. There were 359 posts that derived from this whole sample, which is 7%, meaning that during this period, on the 16 pro-regime Telegram channels, there were only 7% of publications that regarded in some way to legitimacy. And then it followed this typology that I presented a little bit earlier of von Soest and Graf-Vogel. And if we get back, or if I start presenting some results here, then ideology or ideological legitimacy claims were most popular type of the claims made by the pro-regime channels. And the foundational myth, maybe I can just briefly say that this is about the statehood, the national symbols, the historical grounds of the country and the population, the nation, the people. And then a procedural that refer to legal regulation, to legal procedures in the country, that everything is happening according to the laws that exist within the country. They were the least visible. And moving on to this short visualization, as you can see again, we can see that ideology, which proclaims quite a bit of... yes?
Just a final sort of 2-3 minutes, please.
Yeah, right. Ideology is one of those categories that have been pretty much present, and performance that mostly related to how the Belarusian authorities explained their success in certain spheres. And then, of course, the things regarding Lukashenka go here to this personalism. And in these publications, Lukashenka's figure would be praised by his colleagues in the regime and by the Belarusian propaganda speakers as well. So I will skip these examples and move on to the conclusions. So firstly, the Belarusian regime has incorporated technology into its repression routines, improving practices of surveillance and identification, as well as utilization of digital platforms. The routines and repertoire of the Belarusian regime included different types of infrastructure manipulation, such as internet shutdowns, as well as prosecution of dissenters for expressing their opinions online, and blocking of specific web pages, as well as alternative media. As we saw from the Telegram analysis, narratives of pro-regime speakers illustrate that the regime basically sought to mobilize its supporters as well, framing new discourses and strengthening the bonds between the political elites by claiming legitimacy through ideology, performances, international engagement, and personalism. And finally, I will just stop here saying that the study generally shows that in order to legitimize its power, the Belarusian regime not only populated the digital platforms that were popular among the opposition, but also used these platforms to threaten the same groups and to reclaim control over their political agenda and power. For example, by posting confession videos of detained opposition supporters. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
All right. I am going to, I have questions of my own, but I'm actually, we had such rich presentations that I'm fairly sure that there will be questions out in the crowd. So instead of me hogging all the question space, I'd be happy just to begin with questions from the room. Anyone?
Start with the first one.
Oh, okay. So yes, please.
First one is usually the most difficult one to get. My question is actually about this. I was interested about the music, but I hope to listen to more of those because some of them were new. And as for monuments, I was wondering whether there is any other topic to which the government is interested in devoting something, or is it just that period until 1945? And are you aware of any non-governmental initiatives which are worth mentioning? For example, I know that abroad, I can think of at least two things. Like one, there is a memorial to political victims next to the chapel, which we will visit tomorrow. And then there is also a Kostyuszka monument in Switzerland, where I also visited last year, which was created actually not by using the state money, but with some approval from the state, because they were representatives of the Belarusian embassy in Switzerland when it was initially launched. Yeah. So you use that microphone.
To whom was this?
Okay, I will answer. Thank you for the question. But I guess right now the state is strictly control the public space in Belarus. So it's impossible to put here some kind of private message from private person or institution or organization. So it's monopolized by the state. And because of these, the only what the state says, it's inside in the Belarus, and that's it, unfortunately.
Okay. No private initiative allowed. All right. Thank you.
Questions from the room? Or, yep, here? Or, yeah.
So this one's for Andrei about the music. Is it possible to say about the persecution of the anti-Lukashenko musicians, whether it depends on their popularity or whether it depends on how close to the bone their song lyrics are, and if so, what constitutes a really close to the bone song lyric in Belarus?
It depends which period we're talking about. My samples, they cover 30 years or so, and there were different attitudes pursued or strategies pursued by the presidential administration. I honestly don't know how much Lukashenko himself listens to the music that I've been talking about. Maybe it's hidden from him by his advisors, but certainly the presidential administration doesn't leave this sort of activity unpunished. But there were some possibility of kissing and making up. The bands that had been blacklisted because of the concerts on the Bungalow Square, for example, to mark the 10th anniversary of Lukashenko in power, they eventually had been forgiven, or at least some of them had. Others reformed and established a new, effectively an old band under a new name, and started to perform like that, and so on. And I have to say that you needed an official permission to have a public concert in Lukashenko's Belarus. You couldn't really commandeer an available space, hire it, and then sing there. You have to have a written permission to do so. So it was really easy to withdraw such permissions and then reinstate them. Now the situation, if we jump from, I don't know, 2004 right to the present situation, I think musicians are mostly persecuted for their part in this, in what regime calls public disorder, and so on. So they go to jail for participating in those protests as ordinary protesters. Many other protesters are persecuted as well, but musicians are better known, and information about the fact that they are being persecuted now by the Lukashenko regime guarantees headlines for some, for oppositional media, shall we say, and for newspaper. That's in Belarus and outside Belarus, but also for the Guardian, for example. Now the case with Tor Band, which comes from the home city of my distant ancestors, Rogatchevski. I don't really know the details. I haven't seen the court procedures, court proceedings, but because there's a direct mention of insults to the president, which is now a law in Belarus, that you can't really insult the president. That's perhaps the first direct evidence that somebody has been persecuted for criticism of Lukashenko in a song form. But their songs, I know them, they're not particularly insulting. It's like Lukashenko is called Batka, or father, in popular parlance. And the song, one particular song by the Tor Band goes something like, "You're not my father was someone else. Basically, we didn't vote for you." So I think in any other country, it would have been a fairly legitimate thing to say publicly, whether in song form or otherwise. But here it's treated as an insult. Well, we'll watch this space. For the time being, that's what I can say. Sorry about the long answer.
There's a question online.
Okay.
Pavel, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, it's Pavel Shato here, trustee of the Skaryna Library. I have a question to Dr. Vainitsky. Apologies if you covered it, but it's not just about sort of erecting new monuments, which are sort of outside that state propaganda, but also understand they're removing some of the existing ones. Like, Larissa Heniush's one was sort of taking in the middle of the night, and I know some Polish soldiers' memorials were taken down. So I think that's sort of a perhaps clandestine program of sort of removing anything which is sort of outside the state doctrine, so that perhaps you could elaborate on. So they're sort of trying to raise any sort of memories which are not sort of within the state propaganda.
And we'll take the second question.
Thank you.
On the music, on the
Introduce
songs.
yourself, please.
My name is Verika. I'm doing a part-time PhD on digital diaspora activism. I was curious about whether, well, building your samples of songs, whether you paid attention at the commentary on the online, because you mentioned that you used YouTube to collect these songs. How are the audiences, online audiences, engaging with this type of content? Whether you check the visibility metrics and how they kind of probably went on other platforms, and whether, I don't know, if you looked at that, it would be interesting.
Okay, and I have a third question for Alesia. And I'm interested is how do you think, with your research in your paper, how does digital legitimation and co-optation complement or enforce traditional regime survival strategies? Okay, so I'll start with you.
Okay, so thank you for the good question, Pavel. It's not a question, I guess it's the comment, but I told just about three of a variety. There are a lot of problems with contemporary public sculpture and its ideologization. And what I'm talking about it exactly in the frames of Lenin, like plan of monumental propaganda. So they are going to erase the messages of other communities, of other group of people, and not only Larissa Geniush, but also but also the memorials for Polish soldiers. There are a lot of destructions of this kind of tombs, and so it's unfortunately normal. I mean, not normal, but it's contemporary Belarusian, our Belarusian situation. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I haven't really studied specifically the reactions on the YouTube channel to the songs. But what I've seen is mostly complimentary to the songwriters as far as the critical part is concerned. As for other platforms, I don't use them. You have to draw a line somewhere.
Sure. Just probably a comment. Wonder whether the regime is kind of incorporating.
Maybe can you repeat it so that our online people can hear?
Just would be interesting to see in these comments whether the regime is interfering and it tries to kind of manipulate the conversation online at the bottom of the songs.
Yes, I agree with you. The article is a work in progress, and I might look at it. But even in this particular form, it's going to be a mammoth one. You know, it's going to be epic. 97 songs to list. Yeah, that's already half a standard size. I'm not going to write a book about it. Thank you.
And Alesia, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, I think maybe we would need to go a little bit deeper into the research of what are the other ways of usage of digital technology. But what I can talk based on my study is that besides of complementation of the traditional repression by the digital repression, which is usage of social media platforms, but also technological tools to actually identify activists, to monitor and to control and censor the information. The Belarusian regime has showed something that I believe it has not done so much before, which is the competing for the audiences online and making up their own narratives and presenting their kind of picture of the world, of the country in terms of its statehood roots, its ideology, its future, the role of the leader, etc. So I do think that Belarusian regime has been actively trying to populate the platforms that were popular before among the Belarusian opposition in order to compete and to create kind of other types of narratives online. And if we look, for example, today at different platforms such as Telegram, but also TikTok and YouTube, we would see that Belarusian regime is quite a bit present there and has so many forms of interaction with audiences. And sometimes it's a little bit weird types of content, even in terms of aesthetics, but still it's out there. And you can see that the attempt to actually grow the online presence is also kind of successful in a way of views and audiences, etc. Then, of course, the question is how effective it is on forming people's opinions about the regime. But at least we can judge by the numbers so far. We will see whether it's going to lead somewhere. But I do believe that in contrast to prior 2020, the Belarusian regime is not only working reactively, but also proactively with the digital technology.
All right. Thank you so much for your answer. And by the way, so everyone, we've gone a fair bit over time, I think. We've gone sort of into our break. So if you'd like to go for your break now, please do. But we're going to have some additional, I'm going to keep these two presenters prisoned at the front here to receive 2 more questions from online members. So feel free to make noise and move around, but we're also going to take some online questions. Yeah, so Yarik?
You can ask them to.
So 2 people seem to have hands up for online questions. You can ask them now to turn off your mute and ask your questions, please.
Thank you so much. I'll be very brief. I have a question for Professor Rogatchevski, and it concerns whether you were interested into looking into what the regime is doing to those ambiguous songs, and are there any cases of interception of the ambiguity and using it in its own favor? Because what I've been thinking is the particular case that happened in 2020 with Rocker Joker song, Sanya Stanya s nami, since it gained enormous popularity, used as a song that was loud in the streets by the pro-regime activists and their campaigns, and as a first account that was very interesting to look at this as a type of a cultural resistance and cultural war, when in the morning you would hear Перемен by Kino from every window in the street, and by the evening there were car rallies from government official demonstrations playing this Sanya Stanya s nami song. So I was thinking about whether I understand that the scope of your research is understandably limited, but whether you were looking into those interception cases. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Rocket Joker would have been my example of how the regime co-opts ambivalent songs, pretending that there is no hidden message, and appropriates them and uses them, as on this particular occasion, as election campaigning material praising Lukashenko, although I very much doubt that it is a genuine praise. Other ambivalent songs have not really become so popular, so that's the only evidence out of 10, I think, in total, that we can use. But yeah, I mean, I can't really add very much to the example that you've already cited. Thank you.
And the second question from the online participant.
Yeah, thank you for your presentations. My question is to Alesia Rudnik, and I was actually wondering if you might say that Belarusian regime is adopting traditions of this internet restriction, or is learning from experience of other post-socialist states or other non-democratic regimes, and what kind of examples, so to what kind of states we can compare Belarusian state apart from Russia, so I mean apart from this neighborhood country. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I would love to have an answer to this question as well. Unfortunately, I do believe that when we talk about this autocratic learning and, you know, adoption of practices from different countries, this is very hard to trace in a way. But of course, we can say that there are similarities with the Russian authoritarian regime, how it worked with the channeling of information, and of course, with this propaganda narratives being distributed on the online platforms. One could say that the Russian example is a little bit farther away in terms of how it used digital technology, for example, for organizing online voting at the local election, etc. So there are different nuances to this, but I do believe that, of course, we cannot compare the Belarusian regime to Chinese and talk about this, what McKinnon called networked authoritarianism, for example. So there are much less shades of this type of competition and channeling that exists in China. So I would still claim that the Russian regime is the closest example when it comes to activation and co-option of digital technology, but still Belarusian regime is very far from it yet, because as I said before, some of the examples or most of the examples of the Belarusian propaganda is really awkward in a way to watch, whereas the Russian ones are much more aesthetic in a way and I can believe that it can attract certain part of audiences. So the Russian regime would be my most obvious answer, I think. But again, there is not a lot of research on that yet.